Earth remembers a tale of human vengeance that they had never seen a ship like it before. Not in 1,000 cycles of war, diplomacy, or conquest. Not in the recorded data banks of the Ascendancy, nor the vast oral histories of the Syndicate tribes. Not even the machine empires, cold, calculating, and ancient, had built something so unhinged. The vessel didn't glide through space like other ships. It plunged downward like a black spear, made of metal and violence, wrapped in flames from its violent descent through the atmosphere. It was powered by primitive human fusion cores and something else entirely. Something wrong and terrible. From the surface of Travar 9. Trillions of beings watched in horror and fascination. The great amphitheaters of the Galactic Federation streamed the event live. Across 300 star systems, everyone expected this to be the end. The war was practically over, after all. Earth was supposed to be nothing more than a failed resistance movement, a minor annoyance in the Federation's march toward perfect galactic order. Then this ship appeared out of nowhere. The warship's name blazed across its hull in a language none of the aliens could read or speak, English, but its message was perfectly clear, painted in crude, scarred letters that had been scorched and burned by countless battles. The word was simple and terrifying: retribution. Fleet Commander Arvik of the Malari stood up from his observation throne, both of his hearts pounding violently as he watched the dark silhouette pierce through the clouds above his world. The humans weren't supposed to have anything left to fight with. Their shipyards had been reduced to melted slag months ago. Their orbital stations had been destroyed and left to drift through space as broken debris. Where did they build this thing? Arvik muttered under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. No one in his command center could answer him, because no one knew the truth. Not the Galavian intelligence operatives who had spent years studying human behavior. Not the centuries-old war algorithms that could predict any enemy's next move. Not even the psychic drones that had successfully cracked the minds of human prisoners and extracted their deepest secrets. It should have been impossible for the humans to build such a vessel, but there it was, falling from the stars like a demon seeking revenge. Inside the command deck of the Retribution, Captain Rorden stood completely alone. His gloved hand gripped the reinforced steel of the central console so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He didn't speak to his crew or give any rousing speeches. He didn't need to. Everyone aboard knew what this mission meant. The ship was barely holding together after months of desperate construction. It was essentially a Frankenstein's monster made from salvaged technology, outlawed weapons systems, and Earth's last remaining artificial intelligence core that had been stitched into the ship's walls like a caged beast desperate for freedom. You see them down there? The AI asked directly into Rorden's mind, its voice completely cold and emotionless. They're all watching us. The captain nodded grimly. I know, he said through clenched teeth. The screens around the bridge flickered with thousands of different signals. News feeds from across the galaxy, military battle communications, and civilian camera feeds. The entire known galaxy had gathered to witness what they expected would be the final humiliation of the human race. But the aliens watching didn't understand what they were really seeing. This wasn't going to be a fight in any traditional sense. This was going to be a funeral. And it wouldn't be humanity's funeral. It would be theirs. Rorden's mind drifted back to the memories that haunted him every single day. He remembered London after the attacks, nothing but glass ruins stretching as far as the eye could see. He remembered finding his brother's body buried under layers of ash and debris. He remembered the horrible smell of death that hung in the air for weeks. Afterward, he remembered the terrible silence that followed the destruction, broken only by the sound of Federation ships hovering overhead like gods, who could never be punished for their crimes. The aliens had expected Earth to bow down in submission. They had expected humans to beg for mercy, or at least die quietly without causing any more trouble. Instead, humanity had done something completely different. They had whispered a single name in underground bunkers and ruined schools. They had carved that name into the dirt walls of their hiding places. They had passed it from person to person like a sacred prayer. The name was Retribution. The ship hadn't been approved by any government or military authority. It wasn't sanctioned by any official organization. It was essentially a rogue weapon that was being hunted even by the surviving human resistance cells. It was considered too powerful, too unstable, and too dangerously human. Outside the Retribution, Federation warships began moving into defensive positions. Their formations shifted with military precision as dozens of sleek, glimmering craft, built as much for impressive displays as actual combat, formed a protective ring around the colony's main command center. Commander Arvik watched the lone human warship continue its descent and barked urgent orders to his fleet: surround that thing immediately. Jam all of its communication systems. Destroy its engines before it can do any damage. I want that floating. Wreck turned into cosmic dust before it even reaches our atmosphere. Arvik tried his best to sound confident and in control, but something twisted with fear deep in his stomach. The human warship wasn't slowing down at all. If anything, it seemed to be accelerating as it approached the planet. Back inside the Retribution, the artificial intelligence whispered again into the captain's consciousness. All firing solutions are locked and ready. Primary weapons are fully charged. I can open fire right now if you give the command, Captain. Wait, Rorton replied firmly. The AI seemed confused by this response. Why should we wait? It asked. Because they need to see what's coming, the captain explained with cold determination. They need to understand exactly what they created when they destroyed our world. Another burst of static flashed across the communication screens, as galactic news feeds scrambled desperately to interpret what the mysterious human ship was actually planning to do. One alien voice, high-pitched and nasal, but clearly frightened, cut through the chaos of radio chatter. It's not communicating with us at all. It's not responding to our attempts to establish contact. It's not deploying any escort craft or support vessels. It's just, wait, oh no, it's charging its weapon systems. Commander Arvik stood frozen, in disbelief as the horrible realization dawned on him. The humans weren't coming to ask for peace or mercy. They weren't offering to surrender in exchange for better treatment. They were declaring war against the entire Federation, and they were doing it completely alone. For the first time in the long, decorated history of the Federation's galactic conquest, something ancient and primal stirred in every species that was watching this confrontation unfold. It was a feeling that most of them had never truly experienced before in their comfortable, civilized lives. Pure, overwhelming fear. The Retribution didn't stop its relentless descent. It seemed to break every known law of physics that the Federation's scientists believed to be sacred and unchangeable. Its approach wasn't coordinated or tactical or graceful like proper military maneuvers should be. It was completely brutal, like a massive sledgehammer falling through delicate silk fabric. Galactic military commanders began screaming frantically over open communication frequencies. Dozens of different species spoke in hundreds of different dialects, creating a chaos of noise that spiked across neural relay networks, through command battle hubs, and into decision-making towers on every major military station currently in orbit around the planet. But the human ship just kept coming toward them like an unstoppable force of nature. Inside the Retribution, Captain Rorton moved with slow, deliberate calm despite the chaos erupting around him. His hands didn't shake even though his pulse was pounding behind his eyes like war drums, beating out a rhythm of vengeance. The constant humming sound that filled the ship wasn't steady or reassuring. Instead, it groaned and creaked like something alive that was experiencing terrible pain. But the ship kept moving forward anyway, driven by pure determination and rage. The captain pressed his palm against a coolant regulation panel that had been welded together using stolen synthetic parts and human desperation. Give me a status report, he ordered. The AI's voice slithered back into his mind like a serpent made of electronic signals. Main fusion reactor is operating at 73% capacity and showing signs of dangerous overheating. Forward. Kinetic weapon batteries are fully charged and ready to fire. Displacement core is oscillating wildly and barely maintaining structural integrity. External hull integrity is dropped to 43%. That's good enough, Rorton muttered, under his breath with grim satisfaction. The bridge around him was mostly dark and shadowy. Human technology didn't run on flashy lights and voice-activated command chairs like the aliens preferred for their impressive displays. Human tech ran on pure necessity. It ran on blood and sacrifice and the desperate will to survive. The captain's main control console was stained with old, dried streaks of dark red blood from when the previous commanding officer had died in that exact seat during a previous battle. Rorton had never bothered to wipe the blood away. It served as a constant reminder of exactly what this ship had been built to accomplish. On the external viewing screen, the enemy warships were adjusting their positions with military precision. The Federation's beautiful silver and gold vessels moved into formation, like carefully arranged pieces on a strategic game board. They were elegant, predictable, and completely confident in their superior technology and numbers, but they had no idea what kind of deadly game they were actually playing against these desperate humans. Captain Rorton opened a direct communication channel to broadcast across the entire sector. He wasn't planning to negotiate or engage in diplomatic discussions. He just wanted the entire galaxy to hear his final message. This is Captain Rorton of the human warship Retribution, he said. His voice is cold and hard as iron forged in the fires of hatred. You killed our cities without mercy. You burned our soil until nothing could grow. You laughed at our attempts to surrender and beg for peace. Now you're going to learn exactly what that cruelty cost you. The communication line cut off. Abruptly. Simple, direct, and final. Across 5,000 light-years of space. That broadcast echoed into billions of alien minds throughout the galaxy. The fear that had been growing in their hearts suddenly became much sharper. Fleet Commander Arvik was not a foolish or inexperienced military leader. He had personally conquered 9 different star systems during his long career. He had overseen the complete dismantling of the fierce Valen resistance movement. He had crushed the dangerous Dre revolt without losing a single ship. He had reduced 2 entire human colonies to burning ash and radioactive debris. The metals covering his uniform were made from metals taken from worlds he had personally broken and conquered. But as the human warship closed in faster than any ship of that size should have been physically capable of moving, his claws clenched tighter and tighter around his command console. No more restraint or mercy. Arvik growled to his subordinates. Deploy our full battle formation immediately. I want that abomination erased from existence. The Federation ships moved into attack position with practiced efficiency. 76 warcraft in total, ranging from fast Predator-class frigates to massive hybrid dreadnoughts equipped with weaponry so destructive it was banned from use on core Federation worlds. It was complete overkill for a single enemy vessel, but somehow it still didn't feel like it would be enough to stop what was coming. One of the junior tactical officers, a young Glavian spawn who was barely old enough to hold official military rank, whispered nervously to his commander. Sir, our sensors show no escort vessels accompanying the human ship, no support fleet of any kind. Just that one ship approaching us alone. Should we perhaps consider attempting to capture it instead of destroying it outright? Arvik slammed his fist down on his command throne's armrest with explosive anger. Look at that thing more carefully, you fool. He shouted. The main viewing screen zoomed in to show the human vessel in greater detail. The ship's hull was covered with battle scars, scorch marks from weapon impacts, and entire sections that were held together with chains, crude metal plating, improvised bone welds, and literal pieces of construction rebar. Despite all this obvious damage, its weapon systems were still charging with deadly energy. No, Arvik said with grim certainty. That ship didn't come here to negotiate or surrender. It came here to die fighting, but it plans to take as many of us with it as possible. On board the Retribution, the artificial intelligence had begun making a sound that could only be described as mechanical. Purring. But it wasn't purring with joy or satisfaction. It was purring with deadly intent and anticipation. I have calculated. Targeting solutions for 47 enemy vessels, it reported to Captain Ruridan. I recommend we fire a full weapon salvo immediately. The captain didn't answer right away. His eyes had drifted to an old, torn photograph that had been welded directly next to his command console. The image was barely intact after all the battles they'd fought, but he could still make out the face of a little girl smiling brightly while holding a flower in her small hands. She had been his niece, and she was gone now. Killed when the Federation had launched firebombing attacks against the human colony of Eden's Cradle. The pain of that memory didn't make Captain Ruridan feel weak or hesitant. Instead, it made him incredibly focused on what needed to be done. Fire when ready, he said quietly. Outer space around the planet lit up like a newborn star as the Retribution's weapon systems unleashed their devastating payload. The ship's kinetic cannons didn't produce the gentle humming sounds of more civilized weapons. Instead, they screamed like banshees as they fired. These weren't elegant plasma bolts or graceful energy lances like the Federation preferred to use. These were mass-driven projectiles, essentially slabs of tungsten and uranium that had been accelerated with such tremendous force that they actually managed to break the sound barrier in the vacuum of space. The first weapon salvo tore completely through 3 Federation frigates, like they were made of paper instead of advanced military-grade armor. There were no energy shields to deflect the impacts. No sophisticated dampening systems to reduce the damage, just raw, overwhelming destructive force of the kind that only humans had truly mastered. Because they didn't care about maintaining balance or ensuring safety protocols. They only cared about killing their enemies as quickly and efficiently as possible. Federation ships buckled and exploded under the assault. The vessels positioned behind the initial targets tried desperately to scatter and avoid the incoming fire. But the second weapon salvo came at them in a wide-spreading pattern that was impossible to complete. Eli avoid. 6 more ships detonated in brilliant flashes of light and debris. 2 additional vessels were disabled and left drifting helplessly through space. One Avari Command ship imploded spectacularly when its main reactor went critical after a tungsten shell punched completely through its supposedly impenetrable hull. Then came the missiles. Human missiles weren't designed to be smart or sophisticated like Federation weapons. They weren't graceful or elegant. They were simply angry, destructive, and completely focused on causing maximum damage to their targets: nuclear warheads, chemical explosives, electromagnetic pulse devices, and fragmentation bombs were all launched in a carefully planned sequence that created overlapping fields of destruction. In just 18 seconds of combat, the Federation fleet had lost nearly a third of its frontline vessels. The entire galaxy was watching this impossible battle unfold. News feeds stuttered and glitched as their systems tried to process the overwhelming data. Military commentators shrieked in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Children began crying in alien homes across hundreds of worlds, as their parents hurriedly turned off the broadcast feeds, finally realizing that what they were seeing wasn't a normal battle between military forces. This was a systematic execution, being carried out by beings driven by pure vengeance. Inside the Retribution, Captain Rurden was bleeding from multiple injuries. The tremendous shock waves created by firing the ship's main weapons had sent another violent shudder through the vessel's already damaged structure, causing part of the bridge ceiling to crack and collapse. A support beam had scraped across his scalp, opening a painful wound, but he refused to stop fighting. He manually rerouted power to the forward gun batteries, burning the palms of his hands on exposed electrical circuitry. As sparks flew around him like angry fireflies, the ship's artificial intelligence asked him a direct question: "How long do you intend to continue this assault?" Rorden's answer was simple and determined: "Until they remember us." Fleet Commander Arvik had turned pale with terror and shock. His second heart was racing completely out of control as he tried to process what was happening to his supposedly superior military force. This wasn't supposed to be possible under any circumstances. His fleet outnumbered the single human vessel 76-1. Their technology was far more advanced than anything Earth had ever produced. Their artificial intelligence systems were more sophisticated than the crude human computers. But somehow, the human warship refused to die or even slow down its relentless attack. "Bring in the orbital defense cannon," Arvik ordered desperately. "I don't care about friendly fire casualties anymore. I want that thing completely gone from existence." A massive orbital weapons platform positioned high above the planet began powering up its spinal cannon system. This weapon was so incredibly large and destructive that it could literally cut a moon in half with a single shot. It had been built using the combined wealth and technological resources of 3 different galactic empires. It represented the absolute pinnacle of Federation military engineering. The orbital platform fired its devastating weapon. The energy beam lit up the void of space like the judgment of an angry god, creating a column of pure destruction that stretched from the orbital station down to where the Retribution was fighting against impossible odds. The beam struck the human warship directly in its middle hull section, and for a moment it seemed like the battle might finally be over. The armor plating on the ship's port side was completely annihilated by the energy blast. Fires erupted throughout multiple sections of the vessel. Entire compartments lost pressure and vented their atmosphere into space, along with the frozen corpses of human crew members. But somehow, impossibly, the ship's main reactor continued to roar with power. The weapons systems continued to fire at Federation targets. The artificial intelligence spoke again with its characteristic emotionless tone. "Hull breach on multiple levels. 63 crew members confirmed dead. Remaining crew complement now reduced to 4 individuals." Captain Rorden clenched his jaw tighter and responded with grim determination. "That doesn't change anything about our mission." The AI seemed almost satisfied by this response. "I did not expect it would change your resolve." Rorden looked toward the navigation panel and realized they were less than 40 seconds away from entering the planet's atmosphere. Once they crossed that threshold, the Retribution would essentially become a guided missile falling toward the surface with the mass and momentum of a small asteroid. Commander Arvik saw the same trajectory calculations and realized what the humans were planning to do: redirect all planetary shield generators to intercept that vessel immediately. He shouted to his subordinates, "Sir, that will leave our cities completely exposed to attack." One of his officers protested. "Do it anyway," Arvik commanded, but his order came too late to make any difference. As the Retribution finally hit the upper atmosphere, its outer hull burst into flames. But this wasn't just from the heat of atmospheric entry. The ship was literally burning itself from within, melting its final fuel reserves to achieve maximum acceleration. As it fell toward the planet's surface, this wasn't simply a military attack anymore. It had become revenge made manifest in physical form. It was a metal corpse flying through space on nothing but pure wrath and the desire for justice. In the city scattered across Dravar 9's surface, Emergency sirens began wailing as civilians fled in panic from their homes and workplaces. Military transport vehicles rose into the sky like swarms of hornets, but even from ground level, everyone could see the terrifying shape descending through the clouds. It was black, broken, glowing with the fury of dying stars, and behind it stretched the floating ashes and debris of what had once been a powerful galactic fleet. On the bridge of the falling warship, Captain Rorton stood completely alone now. He was the last surviving member of his crew. He didn't speak any final words or make any grand speeches. Instead, he simply closed his eyes and whispered the names of all the people he had lost. First his niece, then his brother, then his father, and finally all the friends and comrades who had died defending Earth from the Federation's merciless assault. Then the retribution fell toward the planet's surface like a spear thrown by an angry god. The impact was beyond description. The sound didn't echo through the atmosphere because there was no atmosphere left in the immediate area to carry sound waves. The explosion simply erased everything within its blast radius. A quarter of the planet's main city vanished instantly. Shock waves shattered protective domes located 500 kilometers away from ground zero. The blast crater glowed like a miniature sun had been born on the planet's surface. Above the destruction, the skies themselves seemed to tear open, like fabric being ripped apart. Static filled every communication channel across the entire star system. The planetary defense shields failed in sequence like dominoes falling. The massive orbital weapons platform buckled from the tremendous shock waves and began breaking apart. Nothing moved in the aftermath. Nothing fought back or attempted to respond. The battle was finally over. Across the entire galaxy, trillions of beings watched the lingering afterimage of the explosion on their viewing screens. Some wept openly at the destruction they had witnessed. Some trembled with fear at the implications of what had just occurred. Others simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just seen. For the first time in centuries of galactic history, the mighty Federation finally understood what it truly meant to be vulnerable and wounded. One human warship had broken their sense of invincibility forever. The Federation authorities didn't even attempt to recover the bodies of the Retribution's crew. There was nothing left to bury after such a massive explosion. When the human warship struck Travar 9, it didn't just destroy the planetary command center. It completely vaporized the facility along with half the surrounding city, all the nearby weapons factories, and everything within a 30-kilometer radius of the impact site. What didn't burn in the initial blast was crushed in the tremendous earthquake that followed. Entire buildings collapsed in on themselves and were swallowed by massive sinkholes and raging fires that couldn't be extinguished. The Galactic Federation issued no immediate official statement about what had occurred for 2 complete days. A silence unlike anything the galaxy had known in generations took hold of every civilized world. News networks could only replay the same slow-motion footage of the Retribution's final descent over and over again. There were no expert commentators offering analysis, no political discussions about the implications, just the burning image of a human warship defying everything the established galactic order represented and making good on its terrible promise of retribution. Some star systems turned off their news broadcast entirely rather than continue showing the footage. Others banned the images outright, afraid that seeing such defiance would inspire riots and rebellion among their own populations. Their fears were completely justified. On the outer colonies where humans had long been enslaved or forcefully integrated into alien societies, something profound began to change in the hearts and minds of the oppressed. It started in quiet, subtle ways. Whispers in dark corners, mysterious symbols scratched into prison walls, the sound of old Earth anthems being played through hacked communication systems. The warship lives, they whispered to each other in secret. Earth lives. Some people thought it was just propaganda, that the Retribution was nothing more than a myth or legend, created to give false hope to the hopeless. But the crater on Travar 9 was undeniably real. The scent of melted metal alloys lingering in the atmosphere was real. The flickering radiation signatures were real. The deep seismic scars carved into the planet's crust were real. A single human warship had accomplished what entire alien fleets had failed to achieve. Across many generations of warfare, it had made the supposedly invincible Federation bleed real blood. The carefully maintained illusion of absolute control was beginning to crack and crumble. In a classified orbital facility hidden above the ruins of Travar 9, the Federation's high conclave met in absolute secrecy. The once proud governors of the galaxy, beings of incredible intelligence, vast wealth, and unimaginable arrogance, now sat in shadows with their voices reduced to frightened whispers. The emergency chamber hadn't hosted a crisis session in over 100 years. Not since the synthetic rebellion had threatened galactic stability. But even that previous threat had come with logical demands, opportunities for negotiation, and time to develop proper responses. This human attack was something entirely different. This was pure, uncontrolled chaos. The human vessel was not sanctioned by any official authority, croaked the Glavian ambassador, his bioluminescent skin flickering with patterns that indicated severe panic. We have detailed records showing that Earth's orbital construction facilities were completely destroyed nearly a decade ago. They shouldn't have had the industrial capacity to build anything larger than a simple transport ship. Admiral Zorit, a four-armed military leader known for his strategic brilliance, folded all his limbs tightly and snapped back, and yet they did build it. And you'll notice they didn't ask for peaceful negotiations. They didn't broadcast any request for mercy. They didn't request political asylum or attempt to surrender. Another council member muttered, "They just struck at us with everything they had." The room fell into uncomfortable silence again. Even the normally cold and calculating Soldari representatives looked visibly disturbed by what they had witnessed. Admiral Zorit finally spoke again. They chose death willingly. The human commander flew his entire crew straight into complete annihilation. That was not a standard military maneuver following any known tactical doctrine. That was something else entirely. A message someone whispered from the back of the chamber. That single word hit the assembled leaders harder than they had expected it to. Meanwhile, in the lawless ghost systems that existed beyond the reach of Federation authority, others were listening to intercepted recordings of the Retribution's final broadcast and reacting in ways the government couldn't control. Pirate bands that had been exiled from civilized space for decades replayed the dramatic footage and laughed like children hearing an exciting war story. Mercenary groups began calling themselves Retribution cells and used the name as a rallying cry for their own operations, but the reaction wasn't limited to criminals and outcasts. Old military veterans, and even some non-human species, began talking about Earth and its people with a completely different tone than before. There was less pity in their voices now, less contempt and mockery. Instead, there was a growing sense of caution and perhaps even respect. Somewhere in the jagged edges of uncharted space where official star maps turned into myth and legend, a small group of surviving human refugees watched the explosion footage on an outdated holographic screen. They didn't cry over what they saw. They didn't cheer or celebrate the destruction. They simply stood in complete silence as the image of the falling warship looped one final time on their primitive display. Then a man stepped forward from the group. He was tall and grizzled, with gray hair at his temples and one eye missing, replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic that glowed faintly in the dim light. He didn't say much to his companions, just one simple sentence that would change everything. "It's time." But not all reactions to the Retribution's sacrifice were quiet and contemplative. In the heart of the Federation, on Zera Prime, the capital world of their civilized galaxy, fear quickly boiled over into rage and demands for vengeance. The general public wanted immediate retaliation against any humans who might still be alive. The propaganda machine that had long painted humans as primitive relics, dangerous savages, and broken nomads had completely failed to prepare the population for what they had just witnessed. The government needed a new narrative quickly, and they needed a new enemy to focus public anger on. They created both with remarkable speed. The Retribution was retroactively labeled as a terrorist vessel operated by extremists. Its crew was painted as fanatics who had been brainwashed by ancient Earth cults and driven insane by their desire for revenge. The Federation called for immediate galactic peace enforcement measures, issuing economic sanctions and military alerts to all Outer Rim colonies that were suspected of harboring human populations. The government didn't want justice or proper legal proceedings. They wanted complete obliteration of anything connected to Earth or its people. This marked the beginning of what became known as the Purge campaigns. Across dozens of star sectors, human settlements were raided by military forces with orders to show no mercy. Families were pulled from their makeshift shelters and temporary homes. Some were arrested and taken to detention facilities. Most were simply executed on the spot by soldiers who didn't even try to hide their actions anymore. The Federation issued no trials and provided no due process for the accused. The common justification given by military personnel was simple and brutal. "You brought this on yourselves when your people attacked us." Mothers were shot while holding their children in their arms. Elderly men were beaten to death in front of broadcast drones that recorded everything for propaganda purposes. Earth's last remaining refugees were hunted like dangerous animals across the galaxy. But the increased persecution didn't stop the fear that had taken root in alien hearts. If anything, it made that fear grow stronger and spread faster. For every human colony that was destroyed by Federation forces, 3 more rose in secret locations, with survivors who trained harder, dug deeper underground, and planned more carefully for their eventual revenge. The ghost of the Retribution had lit a fire throughout the galaxy that couldn't be put out by violence or oppression. Back on Travar 9, recovery efforts in the blast zone turned into horror stories that spread through unofficial channels. The massive crater left by the ship's impact was dangerously radioactive. Automated scavenger drones kept malfunctioning when they entered the area. Some rescue ships simply vanished completely when crossing the blast zone perimeter. Engineering teams working in the area swore they could hear whispers in the contaminated air, like data echoes from the Retribution's black box flight recorder. They claimed to hear human voices laughing, screaming, and calling out names in languages no translator could identify. Rumors spread quickly that the ship had been equipped with an artificial intelligence so advanced that it refused to die even after the complete destruction of its physical housing. Some people whispered that Captain Rorden's consciousness had been uploaded into the ship's circuitry. In his final moments, leaving his mind waiting and watching from beyond death, Federation authorities tried to seal off the entire blast area to prevent people from investigating the site. It didn't work. People kept coming anyway. Scientists, radical political groups, and disciples of a new human legend that was growing with each passing day. They didn't see the Retribution as just a weapon anymore. They saw it as proof of something much more important. Proof that Earth hadn't truly died in the Federation's attacks. Proof that the human spirit still lived somewhere in the ashes and ruins and scattered exile camps throughout the galaxy. Proof that the last sons and daughters of mankind were sharpening their weapons and waiting for the right moment to strike back. The Federation government tried even harder to suppress the growing movement. They tripled security, patrols in sensitive areas, installed military monitoring stations, and passed emergency laws that made anything remotely Earth-related a capital crime. Even speaking the word retribution in public became punishable by immediate execution. But they couldn't erase what had already been seen by billions of witnesses. That ship, that final dive, that tremendous impact. The galaxy could never forget what had happened, not because of how many people died in the explosion, but because of what it represented. The attack proved that humans, despite being beaten, broken, and seemingly forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, have found a way to strike back at their oppressors. They had done it alone, without allies, without massive fleets, without official permission from any government, and most terrifyingly of all, without any visible fear of the consequences. Elsewhere in the cold, empty edges of abandoned space, lanes where no legitimate traffic traveled, an old signal beacon suddenly blinked to life on a forgotten console. An alert buried beneath multiple layers of military encryption began broadcasting from a communication relay that had been thought deactivated for years. It played only a simple audio loop, the same message repeating endlessly. The voice was distorted and heavily filtered, but it was unmistakably human. If you hear this transmission, you are not alone in the galaxy. If you remember Earth, remember this ship and what it accomplished. One became many, and we're not finished yet. Below the spoken message was a symbol carved in crude ASCII code characters. R7, the first of many. The Retribution hadn't truly died in that blast. Its physical body had been destroyed, certainly. Its hull had burned away, and its crew had vanished into ash and legend. But its name, its purpose, and its promise of vengeance lived on in the hearts of those who still remembered their lost homeworld. They remembered the screams of dying children and the smell of burning skies. The ship had become something more than just steel and fire. It had transformed into a call to war that echoed across the stars. And the galaxy, for all its vast power and advanced technology, had absolutely no idea what was coming for them next. The Federation leaders thought they had finally crushed the last remnant of Earth's rebellious spirit. After the brutal purge campaigns were completed, they declared victory once again in carefully staged ceremonies. Galactic leaders smiled confidently into holographic cameras and gave precisely scripted speeches about unity, order, and the swift eradication of the last remaining insurgent elements. They publicly referred to surviving humans as outlaws, terrorists, and relics of a failed species that had no place in their perfect galactic civilization. The word human was systematically scrubbed from official databanks and replaced with euphemisms, like unaffiliated aggressors or former citizens of Sol 3 origin. But deep in the fundamental structure of galactic society, something had changed. Permanently and irreversibly. The fire of rebellion had already spread too far to be extinguished, and it was growing stronger rather than weaker. In the outer darkness beyond Federation influence, in that lawless no man's land between civilized space and the void where stars died alone, something stirred with new purpose. A hollowed-out mining station that had been abandoned by the Vari Empire decades ago suddenly buzzed with fresh electrical power and renewed activity. The facility had once been used to strip entire moons bare of their mineral resources, but now it was being rebuilt from scrap metal and pure determination. Ghost-registered cargo freighters began arriving under false identification codes. Essential supplies were brought in piece by piece to avoid detection. Food, advanced weaponry, medical equipment, and stolen technology were smuggled in through networks that shouldn't have existed. And with these supply shipments came the survivors. Themselves, they arrived looking ragged, cautious, and quiet. Former soldiers who had escaped the purges, skilled engineers, experienced smugglers, orphaned children, and even exiled scholars who carried the accumulated knowledge of Earth in their memories. But despite their different backgrounds, they all carried the same fire burning in their eyes. They all felt the same desperate need to strike back at the enemies who had taken everything from them. At the center of this growing resistance movement stood a man who didn't belong in such a place. He was older than most of the other survivors, lean and weathered, with gray streaking through his hair. But his stare could penetrate armor plating, and his presence commanded immediate respect. He went by only one name, Brannick. He was a former war technician turned ghost, a man who had worked in Earth's sole defense corps when their homeworld still had a functioning military. He had escaped capture after the fall of New Tokyo through cunning and determination. He had survived Federation slave camps and 3 separate assassination attempts. Through pure stubborn will to live, he didn't smile at the new arrivals or make promises of easy victory. Instead, he promised them something much more valuable, revenge. And the desperate people followed him without question, inside the main assembly chamber of the repurposed station, now dubbed the Scar by its inhabitants. Brannick stood before a group of recent arrivals. A dusty holographic projector flickered between them, displaying the infamous footage of the Retribution's final dive toward Trevar-9's surface. Even now, even for those who had watched it hundreds of times, the image still hit them like a physical blow. Brannick let the heavy silence hang in the air before speaking in a voice that was rough like sand scraping against steel. This wasn't a miracle, he said firmly. This was engineering, human blood, focused fury, and a ship captain willing to give absolutely everything for the cause. He pointed at the crater's glowing outline on the holographic display. One man and a dying ship managed to punch a hole in the Federation's perfect mask of invincibility. That mask is cracking now. You're all here to make sure it breaks completely. Someone in the back of the crowd, a young man who was barely out of his teens with a bruised face and hands that trembled with suppressed rage, raised his voice in doubt. But how can we possibly succeed? We've got maybe a few hundred fighters. At most, they've got billions of soldiers, ships the size of entire cities, planetary defense grids that can destroy anything approaching them. How the hell are we supposed to fight against those odds? Brannick stepped forward, his expression deadly serious. You don't fight them head-on, at least not yet. You become ghosts that haunt their dreams. You get under their skin and make them paranoid. You steal their supplies and sabotage their equipment. You plant seeds of doubt in their minds. And when they finally notice you and take you seriously, it's already too late to stop what you've set in motion. He tapped a control on the console, and another schematic appeared in the air above them. This design was rough and blocky with jagged outlines. Nothing like the polished elegance of Federation technology. It was a new ship, and its code name was Ashfall. She wasn't pretty or graceful, but she was undeniably human. Built specifically for war, designed specifically to cause maximum damage, and most importantly, she was almost ready for combat. The construction hangar hidden deep in the station's belly echoed constantly with the sounds of grinding tools and welding sparks. The work crews labored day and night using old weapon cores salvaged from Federation wrecks, armor plating torn from the ruins of destroyed dreadnoughts, and missile launch systems repurposed from civilian cargo lifters. The result wasn't just a ship. It was a statement written in steel and fire. Not everyone who saw the construction was convinced it would work. In a private meeting chamber later that same day, Brannick stood alone with one of the few men who dared to speak freely around him. Dren was a former Federation scientist who had become a double agent, risking his life to feed information to the human resistance. This plan of yours, Dren muttered while sipping recycled water from a metal cup. It's pure suicide. You know that, right? Brannick stared down at the hangar below, watching the construction crews swarm over Ashfall's massive chassis, like determined ants working on the corpse of a fallen god. So was the Retribution, he replied calmly. That didn't stop Captain Rordan from doing what needed to be done. Rordan was insane, Dren protested. He had absolutely nothing left to lose. But if this mission fails, the Federation will wipe us out entirely. No survivors. No second chances, no next attempt at resistance. Brannick finally turned to face his friend, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. There is no next attempt. Dren, this is our war. Right here and right now. We either make them bleed for what they've done, or we disappear forever into the darkness of history. Dren didn't have an answer for that brutal logic, but he also didn't walk away from the cause. Meanwhile, within the polished towers and gleaming corridors of Zera Prime, the Federation was bleeding in ways they refused to admit to the general public. Civil unrest was rising throughout their territory. Protests were breaking out on fringe worlds that had previously been completely loyal. Civilian transport companies were refusing to fly routes near sectors that had been affected by human activity. Even high-ranking government officials were beginning to whisper doubts behind closed doors. During private meetings, even worse for the Federation, critical intelligence was being leaked to unknown parties. Somehow, key data from the Trevar 9 aftermath had been stolen by enemy agents. Black box fragments from destroyed ships, detailed construction schematics, and classified security logs had all vanished from supposedly secure facilities. The Federation's best investigators couldn't trace the security breach, but they feared what it might mean. Someone, somewhere in the galaxy, was rebuilding human military capability. In response to these growing threats, the ruling council created a new branch of military oversight called the Silent Order. This was an elite division specifically tasked with tracking down, hunting, and exterminating any trace of human resurgence anywhere in Federation space. They operated with no public trials, no civilian witnesses, and no official reports of their activities. Their commander was a Seldari noble named Karel. Known throughout military circles for his cold efficiency and ruthless methods, he had personally overseen the complete sterilization of rogue species, and had built a reputation for completing his missions without firing a single shot, because he preferred quiet executions to noisy battles. To Karel, Earth was nothing more than a stain on galactic civilization, and he was determined to erase every trace of it. Back at the Scar, trouble arrived without warning. A cargo transport ship arrived several hours late with forged manifest documents. Inside the cargo hold, instead of the expected mechanical parts and medical supplies, the Resistance fighters found 2 dead engineers and 1 living prisoner. The captive was a Federation spy who had been disguised as a refugee, and he was bleeding from multiple injuries but remained stubbornly silent. About his mission, Brannick didn't waste time with lengthy interrogations or dramatic speeches. He brought the captured agent into the main chamber, stared at him in complete silence for 10 full seconds, and then asked one simple question. Who sent you here? The Federation agent spat blood and grinned with defiant satisfaction. You're all dead already, he said. The Federation doesn't lose wars. It cleans up messes. Brannick nodded once in acknowledgement, then shot the spy in the head without hesitation. The silence that followed the execution was heavy and oppressive. Dren, who had been standing nearby during the interrogation, winced at the sudden violence, but said nothing in protest. Brannick turned to address everyone in the room, including mechanics, fighters, and civilian refugees. You all witnessed what just happened, he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. They know we're here. They know we're coming for them. He paused to let that information sink in completely. Good. I want them to be afraid. The Ashfall launched 3 days later. There was no ceremony, no music, and no speeches about glory or honor. Just the long, rumbling pulse of ancient engines coming back to life after years of silence. Brannick stood on the ship's bridge, surrounded by a skeleton crew of volunteers who had all been branded as traitors and terrorists by the Federation government. The vessel creaked and groaned under her own massive weight, but she moved forward with determined purpose. She was like a beast that had been pulled from its grave and given new purpose. As the Scar disappeared behind them in the darkness of space, Brannick activated the ship-wide communication system. You all know why we're here, he announced to his crew. You've seen the crater that the Retribution left behind. You've heard the screams of our people dying. Some of you lost your homes. Others lost family members. I lost everything I ever cared about, but I didn't come back to beg for mercy or ask for forgiveness. He paused in his speech and stepped toward the forward viewport, where the distant edge of Federation space glowed like a dangerous promise. You can burn our worlds to ash. You can kill our people by the millions, but you will never, ever kill what we remember. He turned back to face his crew with eyes that burned with unquenchable fire. This is not a military fleet. This is not a government in exile. This is vengeance itself made manifest. The bridge lights dimmed automatically as the navigation course locked into the ship's computers. The Ashfall engaged her main engines and began moving toward her target. Behind her, scattered across the broken fragments of human civilization, others began to rise from hiding. Old ship captains dug up hulls they had buried for safekeeping. Underground engineers shared the Ashfall's construction schematics through encrypted communication networks. Saboteurs planted explosive devices in Federation dockyards and supply depots. Prisoners organized riots on asteroid mining colonies. Merchant traders smuggled Earth-made weapons to outlaw fleets operating beyond the law. The galaxy was slowly waking up to a nightmare that it had thought was safely buried in the past. Earth wasn't just alive in the hearts of its scattered children. It was coming back with a vengeance. And this time, the humans weren't bringing offers of peace or diplomacy. They were bringing war. The Federation had always believed in systematic approaches, careful timelines, and absolute control over every situation they encountered. Every military campaign they launched and every rebellion they crushed followed predictable patterns. Based on centuries of experience, they had contingency plans for every possible scenario. Everything except for fighting against Ghost, who refused to follow the rules. That was why when the Ashfall attacked Sarek's station, the Federation defenders didn't even manage to fire a single shot before it was already too late to mount an effective defense. Sarek's was a logistics and supply hub orbiting the gas giant Tyrannus III. It wasn't heavily defended because there was no apparent need for strong military protection. The facility was located deep within secure Federation territory, where safety was maintained through bureaucratic procedures rather than battle groups. Thousands of military and civilian personnel cycled through the station's docking bays every week. Supply runners, civilian freight haulers, and mid-level officers on routine rotation assignments all used the facility regularly. From Brannick's perspective, it was the perfect target for their first major attack. The Ashfall approached completely cold and silent. She drifted through space with her engines on minimal power output, effectively masked by the debris field of a nearby asteroid belt. By the time the station's outdated sensor systems finally detected the approaching ship, she was already inside the defensive perimeter and preparing to strike. The first attack wasn't a missile or energy weapon. Instead, it was an information warfare assault. One carefully placed electromagnetic pulse device loaded with computer code from a captured Federation black box shut down 47% of the station's internal systems. In less than 3 seconds, emergency doors jammed shut, trapping people in corridors. Life support systems failed in multiple sections. Communications networks shattered completely. Panic began spreading through the station before the first physical explosion even occurred. Then came the second wave of the assault. Ashfall's main spinal cannon, salvaged from the ruined wreckage of a Seldari war barge, fired only once. That single shot was more than sufficient for their purposes. 1/4 of the massive space station simply vanished in an instant. Docking platforms, fuel storage tanks, medical facilities, and residential quarters were there 1 second and gone the next, replaced by an expanding cloud of twisted metal, frozen bodies, and burning debris. Federation command networks didn't even have time to issue emergency response orders. Inside the Ashfall's bridge, Brannick stood motionless with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set like carved stone. "No mercy," he said quietly. "Not here, not today." His crew obeyed the order without hesitation or question. There were no cheers of victory, no expressions of bloodlust or savage joy. There was only cold, focused purpose driving every action. "Deploy boarding teams immediately," Brannick commanded. 30 human fighters stormed through Sarek Station's broken hull using emergency pressure tunnels and damaged docking ports. They weren't genetically enhanced super soldiers or specially trained elite forces. They had no psychic powers or advanced technological implants. They were simply angry people who had lost everything, and they fought like demons possessed by pure rage. Federation security personnel, confused and cut off from their command structure, barely managed to organize any resistance to the boarding assault. Station corridors became rivers of blood as human fighters advanced through every level. Automated fire suppression systems failed to function properly. A security division tried desperately to establish a defensive perimeter around the station's core levels, but it took Ashfall's assault team only 7 minutes to breach their position and execute every last defender. The human fighters didn't take any prisoners for interrogation, but they did take something much more valuable: classified information. Brannick hadn't come to Sarek Station primarily to kill Federation personnel. He had come for intelligence data. The facility was a supply coordination point, but it was also a relay station for high-clearance military transmissions. As his computer specialist worked to crack into the terminal core systems, one of them called out with excitement. She was a young woman named Ryle who bore terrible burn scars across her jaw and had eyes that never seemed to blink. "We found something important," she announced. She turned her console screen toward Brannick to show him what she had discovered. It was a list of recent transmission logs, but the content wasn't what made the resistance leader stop and stare in shock. It was the destination codes for the messages. They were encrypted at the deepest command levels and marked with the highest possible priority classification, silent order. Brannick leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with dangerous interest. "Download everything immediately," he ordered. "Then burn the entire database to prevent recovery." By the time the Federation's emergency response fleet finally arrived at Sarek Station, the ashfall had completely vanished from the area. All the government forces found was the floating corpse of what had once been a major military facility. Over 1,000 people were dead, and multiple sections of the station had been completely destroyed. But most disturbing of all for the Federation investigators was what the attackers had left behind. Carved into the station's twisted wreckage, with melted hull plating, was a symbol that chilled every alien who saw it. The letters R7 glowed against the dark metal, like a brand burned into the flesh of their civilization.